This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support, and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com. Now let's get into the show.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Better Every Shift podcast. You are listening to the second part with Captain Ben Vernon. If you have not heard the first part, you must go listen to the Better Every Shift podcast with Captain Ben Vernon. Ben is a captain, paramedic with San Diego Fire Rescue Department. And on June 24th, 2015, while responding to a routine medical assistance call, Ben was stabbed multiple times by a bystander. And that incident led to him becoming a champion for first responder PTSD recognition and treatment. And the first part really describes the physical toll and the scenario and the scene, and it breaks down the actual event happening. And when we last talked to Ben, he had now started to transition into maybe more the mental side. The painkillers were wearing off, and now the reality sets in. So we want to just dig into the second part of the recovery with Ben. And with me, as always, is Janelle Fisquette. Janelle, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Aaron.
Excited to hear Ben's a continuation, obviously, as I am, and we have again. And there's Ben up in the corner with us. How you doing, Captain? Good to see you.
You too, sir. Good to see you. Welcome back.
And I was trying to highlight just what we were talking about in the first episode. And it's tough, for one, being a first responder, and then two, watching that firsthand. And you gave just an unbelievable play-by-play. But what still gets me is that part didn't bother you at all. It was when you started to talk about how everyone else responded and your partner, and how they stepped up and basically saved you, jumped the barrier. And to me, that's what really stuck out. And again, if you have not heard that first part, but as you were describing just all those feelings, you started to kind of get into, the mental side of stuff. Now, we left off, you were having nightmares, and you're now stuck with the reality of your spouse, right? And so after the nightmares, opiates are off. What's kind of your mental status and state at that point?
Yeah, it's pretty dark, to be honest. I'm in a world of hurt. I can't sleep. And if I do sleep, I'm having horrific nightmares, waking up screaming. And that's kind of where we left off. And then I believe we talked about the news released the video. They showed it on television, my attempted murder in slow motion. And the thing I always tell people, when you go through an event like that, you play it in your head in slow motion. And I had been reliving it every minute of the day, breaking it down in slow motion, just revisiting it. So for them to put it on television in slow motion, and practically from my point of view, because the guy who was wearing a body camera was standing right behind me. I mean, it was surreal. It was the most surreal experience to see my attempted murder from my viewpoint, right? In slow motion, the way I'd been thinking about it. It's pretty wild.
And that's that's the first time you saw it, was on the news, sitting there with your wife. Yeah.
On TV. I didn't know. I never realized the security guards around me were wearing body cameras. And I didn't know when I was getting assaulted that one of them was standing right behind me filming it. So there were so many surprises on that, on television, and seeing it in slow motion. I'm like, oh my God, like this is amazing. But the greatest part of that is I realized that I had a get out of jail free card. Because, I had gotten hundreds of calls and emails and texts asking if I was okay. When that video got released, people started driving to my house, mm-hmm. and they were knocking on my door, and they were looking me in the eye, and they're going, "Man, are you okay?" And I realized they weren't asking if I was physically okay. They were asking if I was mentally okay. And I suddenly realized I had a get out of jail free card. I could go get mental health help and no one would make fun of me, because the stigma across this country is if you ask for mental health help, you're weak. Or if you ask for mental health help, you can't be trusted, right? And suddenly I'm like, man, anyone can see this video. Will totally understand if I go get therapy. And I remember this kind of this burden release of like, oh man, I can go get help, and I could even tell people I'm getting help and no one will make fun of me. And I thought this is great. Like awesome, right? Oh, cool. I get to go get help.
And you mentioned something about jail, and I just wanted to and try to get this point across too. You had said that where you got stabbed, and how did that part come about? Like
Yeah,
how the person stabbed you?
so I didn't know this for almost probably a year and a half after the incident, but I started to travel and speak and share my story and show the video because it gets immediate buy-in, right? I can tell this story to any first responder. I show the video and everyone's like, okay, like we'll listen to what you have to say. Well, I had been invited to speak to Department of Corrections officers, and that was new for me. I'd never spoken to prison guards before. Well, I gave my presentation and I showed the video, and every firefighter, police officer, nurse, I mean, anyone I share the story with, every time I get stabbed, everyone groans and they all go, oh God, like, ooh, and they kind of react. The guards had a weird look on their face, kind of like a golden retriever. When you tell them something, they kind of looked sideways. They were like, huh. And I noticed it when I was giving my presentation, but I didn't say anything. And when it was over, I gave this at a prison. And they said, hey, man, can we show you a video? And I said, yeah. So when I was done, they got a video and it was of a prison yard. And it was kind of up, from where the tower is, looking down in the yard. And it's this film. And you see some guys are playing handball, some guys are lifting weights. But there are 3 or 4 guys, prisoners, over near like a pole. And they have like pencils in their hands. And they're hitting the pole 3 times, low, medium, high, low, medium, high, low, medium, high with these pencils. And I said, what are they doing? And he said, oh, they're practicing to shank us. He said, we wear vests in the prison yard. So they stab us right above the belt, below the vest, going for the kidney, in the armpit where our vests don't protect us, and in the head. And they said, when we saw the video of your guy stabbing you, he hit you in those 3 spots. And they said, that was a prison shank. You got prison shanked from a guy who's been in prison, who knows how to kill guards. And I remember first being like amazed and blown away by how gnarly that is. And then second, like how badass I am that I survived a prison shank, right? Like I went up against a prison trained knife fighter and lived. I felt pretty cool about that, but holy crap, that was yeah, that was
That just
gnarly.
gives chills up your spine to
Oh
think
man.
about that. Like
Well,
the
can we just take
3.
a second? Prison guards, how badass do you have to be a prison guard? I, I mean, they are surrounded at all times by the gnarliest killers, and they just walk around with them, like
And they're
I,
watching them train to kill
trained
them.
to kill them. Like, come on, man, no,
Messed
hell
up.
no, that is
It's
wild.
And so you learn this, but you've already at that point you've recovered, but like there's spots along the way that probably triggered you. You had mentioned previously, like, hey, I kind of got this. Now everybody would understand if I got help.
Yeah,
And so that's going through, but like help is a process, right? Like this recovery is a process. You learning that you got shanked, prison shanked, probably set you back a little bit, like triggered you. Your chief was kind of telling us a story about how you were presenting and something triggered you there, right? So it's a whole process. What was the first step to this?
yeah, great question. So, I'd like to say I went and got help immediately, and it was a piece of cake, and I recovered very fast. But the truth is, the very first person I reached out to, I reached out to my department and I asked for workers' comp because this was a workers' comp injury. And at this point in my career, right, I know nothing about mental health help, and neither does my department, right? We don't have anything in place, nothing. We don't have a peer support team. We don't have therapists. We don't have chaplains. We got nothing. So I said, well, this is workers' comp. I'll call workers' comp. And the city is very accommodating. They sent me 4 names with phone numbers. No specialty, just these are workers' comp therapists. So, okay. So I call the first number, and the voicemail of the guy said, "Hey, I've been retired for 2 years. I'm not taking anyone else. Please stop calling." And that should have been a red flag, but I'm desperate. I haven't slept in a couple of weeks. I'm at the point of, suicide. I mean, this is it's getting bad. I'm in bad shape. So I just called the second number, and the guy says, I can't see you until Friday. It was like a Tuesday. And I remember saying, it's not a problem as long as I know help is on the way. I haven't slept in, a week or two or whatever, but it's okay because I can go 3 more days. Like, as long as I get help, like, I'm good. And so I went into my very first therapist, and I never met one. I don't know what they look like. I kind of had a guy with like a beard in mind, and he had a tweed jacket with elbow patches, and I realized I'm expecting Sigmund Freud.
A pipe, maybe?
A pipe, yes. And I want that half couch, where you lay on the couch and the guy sits behind you. That's kind of what I'm picturing in my head, and I'm very
with
excited.
a notepad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then tell me more. So that's in my head. That's what I get. Well, I met my very first therapist on a Friday, and Zam, he was little. There's nothing wrong with being little. I just wasn't expecting it. Like, this dude was so short, you could see his feet in his driver's license picture. Right? Like, he's tiny, tiny. And I'm telling you, the door to his office, just the bottom half opened up, and this dude walked out through the bottom half of his door. And I remember just like kind of getting down on my knees, and I'm like, "Are you my therapist?" And I picked him up and carried him back to the office. Like, and it's fine, but I was just a little like, "Whoa, okay." But he told me, he goes, "Hey man, I'm excited to work with you. I've never worked with a firefighter before. I work with car accident victims." And I said, "Doc, this is great. I've never worked with a therapist before. I also work with car accident victims. Like, let's do this, right? It's a match made in heaven." And he goes, "All right, well, what's wrong?" And I said, "I don't even have to tell you. I can show you." And I pulled out the video, and I showed him on my phone, I showed him my attempted murder. And he said, "My God, that guy tried to kill you. So, how can I help?" And I said, "Well, I'm having nightmares where I eat this guy's face." And Zam, you should have seen the look on his, like, he was scared of me. And I realized I missed an opportunity. I could have been like, "You look tasty," and scared the shit out of him. But I didn't. But he goes, "Oh, well, Ben, if you're having trouble sleeping, just lay off the caffeine."
Yeah, just lay out. That's it. It's got to be it.
That's right. And I mean, at this point now, I'm like looking at the credentials on his wall, because I'm like, "You're a therapist? Like, this is real? Like, this is your..." And I'm mad. I'm thinking it's probably the knife in my chest, not the coffee in my stomach, you asshole. Right? Like, I'm frustrated.
Yeah.
So my first session was kind of a letdown, and I walked out. And I'm like, well, that was pointless. And then I thought, well, the best therapy for us is us. And so I just figured, what I need to do is sit at the kitchen table around the dining room table and smoke a joke with the guys. They'll tease me. But it'll help me decompress. That's what I need, because I'm very wound up, and I'm very jumpy, and I'm very angry, and I can't sleep. And so I'm frazzled. And so I drove to the nearest firehouse, and we have almost 60 fire stations.
Yeah.
I didn't look at the roster. I just drove to the nearest one, and I walk in the kitchen, and it happens to be one of my academy mates. And this guy, I mean, we're good buddies. His wife and my wife we've double dated. Like, he's one of my boys. And I see him in the kitchen, and I get very excited, and he sees me, he gets excited. And as a joke, he pulls a knife on me. And it's funny, but the way I kind of describe it, is the front of your brain makes rational decisions, and your base brain, right, is your fight or flight. And up until June 24th, 2015, my base brain would listen to the front of my brain, and just, the front of my brain would go, "Do we need to fight? No, yes, no. Okay, let's do it." Or, "No, we're good." Well, I'm at the point now where my base brain doesn't listen. I'm in no control of myself. And so he pulled a knife, and I went into full fight or flight, and I dropped like into position ready to kill. And he saw that, and he's like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry." And he put the knife away, and I apologized to him. And I go, "Look, I came in unannounced. This is my fault. Good joke, but I gotta go." And I ran out of there, and I got in my car, and I drove home, and I was crying because I was out of control, and I was at my wit's end, just stressed out.
And you're physically not recovered 100% yet either, too. So you
Correct.
still have some of those, but
But
the wounds that are really affecting you aren't the physical.
right.
And you had mentioned in our first episode we talked about, like, we're firefighters. Like, yeah, my arm it might be broke, but I'm good. I can go back to the fire. I can do my job, right? And we somehow uh, in most cases not wisely do that, but physically you're not even concerned too much about that, right? At this
Right.
point, you're just thinking,
Right.
man, my wires are crossed. Something's going on.
Yes, I'm crossed. I'm afraid that if I go back to work, the next patient that even looks at me funny, I'm gonna kill him. Right. I am that wound up, right? That wound tight. And I'm not in control of my emotions, right? A buddy of mine pulls a knife as a joke, and I'm ready to kill him. And it's like, this is not me. What is happening? And I don't know how to fix it. And this went on for another couple weeks of trying to deal with this workers' comp therapist. Um, and it's not going well. And I'll tell you that at some point, suicide really became an option. I hadn't slept in so long. And I remember just thinking, if I don't figure this out or find a way to sleep, I own a gun. And then I'm gonna sleep forever and that'll be fine. Um, but Sam, I remember I was sitting in the dark, right? It's like 2 a.m. And I remember thinking, okay, I have to get to 201. I got to get to 201. And so I'm sitting there, and then I watched the clock, and it clicked over to 201. And I just went, oh my God, I have to get to 202. Like, oh, this isn't good, right? And I remember thinking, how did I get here so fast? And I consider myself mentally tough. I think most firefighters are mentally tougher than most. And I used to think, suicide is weakness. But here I am. I'm like, man, I'm tougher than most, and I'm ready to end it. Like, and it only took me what at this point, a month, 6 weeks to get there. And I remember kind of laughing at myself, like, wow, man, you are not as tough as you thought you were. And it's only been 6 weeks and you're ready to end it all. And then I kind of laughed at myself too. Like, the guy tries to kill you, misses, and then you kill yourself. Like, that doesn't even make sense at all. And so I just had this desperation. I was so desperate. Like, how do I get out of this hole that I'm in? And it was at that point I remembered, we talk about the value of peer support. My department didn't have a peer support team, but I knew one guy in my job, a guy named James Shadone, and his nickname was Shooter because he was a former CHP officer and he got in a gunfight with a guy and killed him. Way cooler nickname than any nickname I've ever had. But I remember one time they asked him, hey man, what was it like in the shooting? And he was always very candid and shared everything about the story. And he was on probation after me. And every time we'd bounce through the same station, he's on probation. When the guys learned who he was, they would sit him down at the morning meeting and go, "You got to tell us how you killed a guy," and they make him tell the story. Well, one time, someone said, "Well, hey man, obviously you're here now as a firefighter. You're no longer a cop. So what happened? Like you survived the shooting, but how did you end up leaving CHP and joining us?" And he said that after the shooting, they brought him into an office. They gave him some water and they said, "Sit tight. A police psychologist is going to come talk to you." And a police psychologist came in the room. These two guys had never met. And the psychologist said, "Hey, you've been in a shooting. You killed a guy. Let me outline the next 6 months of your life." And he said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And Shooter said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you're probably going to break up with her. Like statistically speaking, your relationship won't last." And he's like, "Hey man, I just met you. Like, fuck you, But he's like, no, that statistically speaking, you're going to break up with her. And he goes, every time a car backfires, you're going to hit the deck.
No.
He said, you're going to have horrific nightmares. And he said, everyone you meet who's a stranger, you're going to be convinced is related to the guy you shot. Like, you're just going to be on this roller coaster. It's not going to be fun." And then Shooter told us, like clockwork, everything the guy said came true. And so in my head at 2 a.m, when I'm thinking about swallowing a bullet, I remember thinking, well, Shooter's been here. He's been through this. He won his fight, but it ended his career. But at least he could tell me, what's going on. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah.
And so I drove to his station. I waited till 8 a.m. and I found him on the roster, and I drove to the station, and I went to him and I said, "Hey man, you got to help me. Like outline this for me. What's the timeline? What are the symptoms? How do I get out of this? How did you get out of it?" And he was really cool, man. He listened. He was very calm. He sympathized, but he said, "Brother, this is beyond my skill set." He goes, "Why don't you go see a police psychologist?" And I remember thinking, well, duh, like, of course, that's such a better plan.
Yeah.
So he gave me he pulled an old tattered business card out of his wallet with the company. And in San Diego, there is a third party vendor called Focus Psychological Services. And the city of San Diego pays them specifically just to work with cops. And it is free to the police. They can go as many times as they want, unlimited access. They can go into retirement. Anyone that lives in their home can see the therapist as well. So they are like just this catch-all for all things PD. So I called and I talked to a guy named Dr. Mark Foreman. And I said, "Hey, we spoke on the phone. I said, look, I need your help. I can't pay you. Workers' comp won't cover me. My insurance won't cover this." I said, "But if you will help me, just keep track of the bill. And I swear to God, when I get back to work, I will pay you back. Just please don't turn me away." And he said, "Hey man, I'll, just get in here. Don't worry about the bill." And so I immediately drove down and I went to his office and I met him. And the first thing I realized, he was full size. He was a full size human, which I really liked. I was like, "Hey,
this is a good start.
It's a good start. We're seeing eye to eye here. I like this
Yep.
already." But he says, "Hey man, I'm excited to work with you." He goes, "I've never worked with a firefighter before." And I'm like, "Oh shit, here we go." But he said, "But I used to be a cop." He goes, "I was San Diego PD a lieutenant." And he goes, "I retired and then I went to school to become a therapist." He said, so step into my office." And so I did. And he goes, "Well, what's up? Why are you here? You sound pretty bad on the phone." I said, "I don't need to tell you. I can just show you." And I pull out the video. I show him the phone. And he goes, "My God, that guy tried to kill you." And then he asked me, "Hey man, how are your nightmares?"
Mm.
Man, it is hard to describe the sense of relief that, like, oh yeah, I found the right, like, thank God I found the right guy. Like, he knows why I'm here. I don't even have to tell him.
And that the emotion you're feeling, is that just because when you retell the story, you kind of go back to that spot and you're
Well,
like, thank God it was this guy.
but it goes back to helping me
Yeah.
for no reason. I mean, he could have said, "Sorry, bud, we don't have a contract with you," or, "Hey man, I charge 150 an hour," or whatever it was. But
There's good people in the world.
yeah, yeah,
Had you
went out
tried
of
to
his
talk
way
to
to help me.
anybody before him other than the other psychologists, like your spouse, friends? Had
God, no.
you? No.
No, I'm in my own little world of hurt. And honestly, and I mean, we'll talk about my wife later, and then I'll really cry. She is not in my world, right? Like, I am in this dark place, and I don't know. I feel like I'm all alone, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know what's happening to me, and I don't know where to go for help. And I reach out to see a therapist only because my ego and my reputation won't be harmed, uh, because it's on video. And I feel like if that wasn't on video, I wouldn't have had the courage to go get help. Um, and so yeah, I'm going from I'm trying to get, but I have these blinders on. Nothing else in my periphery. Just how do I get out of this hole? Um, and so finding this doctor was amazing, and then of course he really started teaching me a lot about how the brain works and how mental health and that sort of thing. Um, Usually when I travel and I share my story, he's a good half of my talk of just all the stuff he taught me. And I don't know how much you want to go into it, but he really pulled me out of the hole.
Yeah.
Best I can describe it.
What's you talk about him with just a sincerity and an emotion of gratitude. Take us through a little bit, like, the next couple of weeks. Did you see some, like, did you feel relief right away? Did you feel regrets? Kind of take us through just the first part of the counseling process.
Yeah, well, so almost immediately he wanted to do a treatment called EMDR.
Hmm.
I have never heard of EMDR. I don't know what this is. And he said, look, we're going to go through the story, and I'm going to stop you every now and then, and I'm going to wave my fingers back and forth in front of your eyes. And the first time, he said, so what's the first thing you remember about that story? And I said, well, I'm in the kitchen. Alex and I are prepping chicken. We're cutting the fat off chicken, getting ready to make dinner. It's about 4 p.m. And the tones go off, and we see the ticker tape. And the ticker tape is the address of the trolley stop. And remember from part one, we'd already been there 3 times this day. So we have that damn address memorized. And we saw the address, and we're like, God, grr, right? Like, damn it. And then I slide down the pole, and I look at the notes, and it says, babysit a drunk guy until an ambulance can get there. Is basically what it says in the notes, and I'm groaning. And then we get in the rig, and we're driving, and we're talking about everything but the call. We're talking about how the Chargers are leaving, and we're noticing beautiful women walking by, and our head's not in the game. And I was very angry about that. And he says, okay, stop, think about that, and follow my fingers. And he waves them back and forth in front of my eyes, and I'm just sitting there looking at him. And my first thought is, oh, this dude's trying to hypnotize me, right? Like this is a like hypnotism. And so I kind of fold my arms. I'm like, what are you doing, dude? Like, I'm not down with this. And he said, it's not therapy, man. Or, it's not hypno. I'm not trying to hypnotize you. Just trust me. Okay, fine. So I follow his fingers. And I remember being angry that I wasn't ready. But while I'm sitting there, I'm thinking but logically, no firefighter in the history of our department since 1889 has ever been shot or stabbed in the line of duty. So driving to that call, why would I be ready for something like that, right? And I remember just kind of logically having that thought, and I remember my anger dissipated a little bit. And then he goes, okay, carry on. And so then I said, well, we got there. I said, I grabbed my gear. I grabbed the drug box, I grabbed the airway bag, and I grabbed the monitor, drug box, airway bag. And he said, okay, stop, think about that. And he's waving his fingers in front of my face. And I remember being very angry at myself. I didn't bring the trauma bag, and I needed that trauma bag to save Alex, to save myself. And I left that on the rig. And I was very angry, and I was pent up, rage, really. But as he's waving his fingers back and forth in front of my face, I remember thinking logically, hey, man, we don't bring the trauma bag to a medical aid where the guy is standing, walking, talking, and is not a trauma.
Yeah. For the third time, too, right?
Right.
Right.
And I remember I had this little bit that wasn't laziness or complacency. That's policy. We don't bring it, right? And so I didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't know why he was waving his fingers in front of my face. But I remember that first day our session ended, and I was driving home, and I felt lighter. I felt better. And I felt like my shoulders were just a little more relaxed. And as I'm driving home, I'm like, that dude just Miyagi'd me, right? Like, wax on, wax off. Now you know karate. You know what I mean? I was like, what the fuck was that? Like, that was, what is happening? Well, that first night with him in EMDR, I slept for about 4 hours. I woke up screaming, but I didn't taste blood in my mouth, and I wasn't soaked in sweat. And, I was going to bed around 10, and I would wake up screaming at about 11. It's 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my God, I slept for 4 hours and I'm not tasting blood in my mouth. Like, I immediately recognized healing.
Yeah. Progress right there.
Immediate progress. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. Like, what was that? I don't know what it was, but I want to do it again. And so then I was excited to go back. And I remember, come on. Like, let's do EMDR. Like, come on. And so it took us, weeks to process every aspect of that call. And here's what I've learned, right? Logic is the left side of your brain. emotion in the right side of your brain. Yeah. So when we go on calls, we shut off the right side and we go pure logic. It makes us ruthlessly efficient. And Zam, you know this, right? You run on an injured kid who's like critically injured, and you are just methodical, and it's a thing of beauty, right? It's give me the backboard, give me the IV, get on the radio, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and you're just like firing on all cylinders. Well, that's because you shut off emotion and you're pure logic. But when you get off shift, it takes almost 24 hours to turn the emotion back on and process information with both sides of your brain. Well, for me, 24 hours after I get off shift, I'm right back on shift. So I can go a week or 2 without dealing with any of that emotion.
You also have to get sleep in between that time,
Yes.
because that's where
Yes.
you process
Yes.
a lot of
Yes.
this trauma.
Yes.
And that is the one thing I'm going to say again. You
Yes.
also need sleep in order
Yes.
to effectively process this trauma, which is where we can do 4 other shows, 5 other shows on why we are hurting ourselves. But you've now discovered there's progress. There's something here. There's a light. You've started to feel just a little bit better. You got a little sleep. Did you? How quickly were you seeing? The doc, how Dr. Mark? I mean, were you seeing him like every other day, every day at this point?
If I remember early in our sessions, it was like 2 to 3 times a week, and I was living for that. I mean, it was, I'd see him on Monday, and then I was so bummed I couldn't see him on Tuesday, and I'd have to go back on Wednesday. Like I was like, because after the second session, I slept 5 hours. After the third session, 6 hours. And then I would wake up, but I wouldn't be sitting straight up. You know what I mean? Like, and then I would, you know what I mean? And it was 6 hours, and then I'd wake up going, but that was it. It wasn't like, die. And so I was like, oh my God, 6 hours uninterrupted. Like, I'm healing. I'm getting better. And then when I kind of realized, and sometimes I was like, hey, what is this? How is this working? Why is it working? This is so weird. But you said it, Zam. EMDR, eye movement, desensitization and reprocessing is REM. It's REM sleep, rapid eye movement. And of course, I have now become an absolute sleep guru, and I study all things sleep, and I track my sleep with my Fitbit, and I work with a sleep doctor in Canada, and I record every night what I've done and how I'm obsessed with it. But it is REM, EMDR is REM, and it's helping to realign your emotions with your logic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's honestly, I just describe it as like this pressure relief valve where all that rage and anger just kind of just fizzled out. After each session, I felt better and better.
And at this time, you're going home, you're doing work, like you're doing physical work now, probably rehab, you're doing mental work now that you have a better grasp and you're not so this way. So now the blinders are opened up, and here's your wife. Let's dig into that. Not yet.
No, buddy, God bless America. I'm all about me, and I'm all about me. I go back to the doc and I go, buddy, I don't need to EMDR the stabbing. I'm now ready to EMDR 20 years of calls. Like, can we EMDR others? Yeah. And so we do. And I work through every call that has ever bothered me. I EMDR'd it. And at that point, I felt invincible, right? Now I call my chief and I go, Chief, I am so ready to go back to work. Like, now I'm physically ready, and I am mentally stronger than I have ever been, because I have now offloaded every call that has ever bothered me. I feel invincible, right? I'm like, oh my God, I've got mental armor. I am ready. So I go back to work, and I go back to work with my crew, and it is the 4 of us reunited. Alex came back to work a couple weeks before I did. The 4 of us are together. I am happy as a clam. It took me, I think, 4 months from the time I got stabbed. By the time I got back to work, it took me 4 months. I kept seeing Dr. Foreman, though, Dr. Mark, because I was still a little nervous. I hadn't been in a fight yet. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to handle that.
There's still some lingering there you can sense, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I feel pretty damn good. And I'm with my crew and I'm so happy. So I'm now back to work for a couple of weeks. I'm seeing Dr. Foreman and he says, hey man, how's your wife doing with all this? And it didn't even occur to me, right? Like, and I was puzzled by the question. And I go, Mark, what are you talking about, man? Like, she's fine. Like, I'm back to work. What are you talking about? And he and I had a really good relationship at this point. And he said, buddy, I love you, but you are so dumb. He goes, you're so stupid. And I was like, what? And he said, look, I want you to go home tonight. Here we go. He goes, you turn off the TV. You cook your wife her favorite meal. And you sit her down and you ask, how are you doing now that you're back to work? And at this point, I'm like, yeah, all right, doc. Like, whatever you want, man. Like, piece of cake. Like, how hard could this be? So I do. And I sit her down at dinner. And I said, babe, how you doing now that I'm back to work? She goes, fine. And I went, babe, seriously, how are you doing now that I'm back to work? And she got really quiet. And then her lips started to quiver. And then she burst into tears. And she tells me that every day I leave to go to work, she would vomit from the stress. Sam, what kind of a husband doesn't know that his wife is vomiting from stress? And I gotta tell you, man, every now and then, I think I'm pretty smart. Every now and then. Most of the time, I think I'm pretty dumb. This was one of those moments where I felt about a 1/4 inch tall, and I felt just about the stupidest I have ever felt in my life. And I just could not believe that her well-being never crossed my mind. Oh God.
Yeah.
I am
You had
so
one you shouldn't be ashamed of it. I mean, that's
ashamed.
that I've talked to, you talk to a lot of firefighters. Like we're kind of clueless. You could put a life-saving thing in front of us and we're going to save a life. But when it's our own relationships, right? Like
buddy,
we don't have, and I think that's part of the job, right? Like, because we don't recover from the trauma, we lose that sense of reality, right? Like you had mentioned that. And that's reality, is because I told your story to like my family, and they were like, well, how does his wife feel like that? That's my mom's like first question.
Yeah, and that wasn't even an option that I considered. And I'm just so embarrassed and ashamed that I was so self-centered, so focused on me and getting back to work, and then getting back to work and being so proud that I made it back, right? That I survived it, and just being in my own little world of like, I'm so stoked. And so right away, I mean, I realized I screwed up, like, oh boy, I'm backpedaling like crazy. And so I agreed to go to therapy with her. And I didn't want to see Foreman with her because I thought that would be unfair. Mm-hmm. And I wanted a female therapist just so I wanted my wife to feel more comfortable. And I'll tell you, man, that first couple days of therapy was basically her just bawling and me feeling about a 1/4 inch tall. But she finally, the therapist helped her get it out. But she's like, why did you go back to the same station with the same crew? Like, right? Like, are you trying to die? Like, you almost died and then you go back to the same place. Like, And for her, I mean, it was so obvious at that point. I'm like, right, that I could see why you would think that. That
Mhm.
makes complete sense. Wow.
But hey,
Wow.
I feel the same way you do. And Janelle's down there going, "Yeah, it doesn't make sense." And I go like, "Well, that's your crew. That's where you go, right?
Right.
That's what you. That's that's those are your those are the people that you work with. You're familiar with. You know the territory, right? That's what you do.
Yes.
But right, but
Yes.
when you can step away and go, logic says maybe I got hurt doing this. Go back and do the same thing, right? Like,
Right.
um,
Right. Let's
Well,
run
and
this. Go ahead, Janelle.
from her perspective, had she tried to talk about it, but just noticed that you were shut down and gave up? Or was she essentially doing the same thing you were doing, where she just compartmentalized herself in her own way? Was it like the two of you just like in your own worlds independently?
Yes. I mean, my wife is, I think, the perfect firefighter wife in that she is so independent and self-reliant. Um, and she's also very introverted. She's very quiet. She's the opposite of me. I'm loud and boisterous, and she's very quiet, very independent, fiercely independent. Um, and so I think she was just kind of internalizing it. Um, I'll be honest though, I was so in my own little world. If she ever tried to bring it up, I doubt I picked up on it at all. Right? Like I doubt I was aware enough about anyone besides myself during this time period that even if she brought it up, I'm sure I missed it. I was just so in my own little world. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So
and,
the therapy was amazing because it really got her to open up and make me realize like how terrible of a husband I'd been up until that point, regardless of even the stabbing. Just learning how bad a husband I'd been and how self-centered I'd been. God, it was helpful. It was so eye-opening.
yeah, we can be a little clueless. Well, we can be very clueless with this,
Yeah.
but that probably brought you closer together. And we must know you're still together,
Yes.
today, happily married. I think
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure that she's been there, and obviously, you get emotional talking about that because she's one of the reasons why you're back and doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so now you're on the road to recovery mentally, physically, now in your relationship. Let's talk about just a couple things that triggered you. And now that you're starting to see this progress, you're back at work. I know that you still, like we had talked, as an ongoing process. Do you remember some of those triggers and what happened?
Oh, well, sure. So, I got hurt in June. I'm back in October, and the trial is in February.
Mm.
And here's a unique thing, right? I was told while I'm in the hospital bed from the detectives, hey, man, this is going to trial. Like, and you cannot talk to your crew about this. And then the DA, right, the prosecutor who's going after the guy that tried to kill us, he brought us into his office, in October, November, December, keeping us up to date on what's going on. But he would reiterate, hey, man, you cannot talk about this call with your crew. You cannot get your story straight. Well, and he told me when your stories are identical, it looks weird, right? Like it sounds weird, and the jury can spot that you guys are synchronized. And he said, so you can't do that. And all four of us were hell bent on making sure this guy got justice. And so we didn't talk about it on the rig. And but it was the quietest rig you've ever been on in your life because the four of us are together. We're close. All we want to do is talk about the stabbing. And so we would talk about anything and we would just sit quietly on the rig all day. It was weird. It was weird. So I can tell you as it's getting closer and closer to trial, the stress is coming up. And there's pre-trial and the grand jury and there's all these things I don't know shit about court, but
Probably media was there as well, right?
oh God,
Covering
media's
this, yeah.
everywhere. Yep. They're all over the place. And so all of that was very stressful. And I'm a fire medic at this point, and I've also noticing, I'm a little shorter patience with my patients. I'm quick tempered. I'm ready for a fight, even though I've feel good and I've processed the call, I'm not going to get caught again. And so I'm very like short and curt and tense and, just I'm not being a good patient advocate. I'm not. And so you could argue I'm not healed because I'm still very angry and ready to go, right? I'm always ready. And I would do my assessment with my hand in my back pocket because that's where my knife was. You know what I mean? And I just have my hand on my knife and I'm like, okay, let's talk. How you doing? You have chest pain? Like, what's going on? Right? So I'm struggling.
You're on edge. You're on
I'm
edge.
on edge.
Always.
I'm on edge. So the actual the tipping point had to be I was invited to GEMS magazine. They do a big conference every year, EMS Expo. Yeah. Well, I wrote an article for them. It was published in February of 2016, and I kind of shared the story that I shared with you guys.
Yeah. So you wrote an article. You're at this conference, and they're having you speak at this conference, right?
Actually, they roll out the red carpet. They bring Alex with me. We don't have to speak, and I'm not a professional speaker at this point. I'm just. What's funny is I was on the cover of Jim's magazine, and at EMS Expo, the cover is their posters for the whole. So my face is everywhere. It was surreal. It was a little weird, but they roll out the red carpet and they treat Alex and I to dinner, and they bring us along to everything. And they asked us if we wanted to be involved in. They do these paramedic games, these competitions. It's the wildest thing I've ever seen. I've never done anything like it. But they have these teams, 2 to 3 person teams, compete, and they have to do assessments, and they're timed, and then their treatment, and
run through actual scenarios,
scenarios, right?
Simulations, yeah.
Yeah, and so they said, "Hey, do you and Alex want to volunteer to be actors in the final, the finale?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." And they said, "Okay, well, the top 3 teams that have been competing all week get to do this big finale. They're going to have the whole conference comes in and watches these scenarios, and there's like 3,000 to 4,000 people in the stands, watching this competition." And they said, "We're going to do a big. There's a band. They hired a real band, and they're on a stage, and they're playing at a rock concert. And the scenario goes is the stage collapses, and it turns into an MCI." So they had actors, maybe 50 or 60 actors, pretending to be fans, and they had a stage with a real band. Like, it was gnarly. Like, the amount of money and time and effort was impressive. And they said, "You and Alex are going to be security guards." And I'm like, "All right, cool." And they said, and so they had a railing up between the stage and the people. And so all the people, and then there's a bunch of security guards, and me and Alex are one of them. And they said, "All right, look, this is going to collapse. The team's going to come in. They're going to have to take care of everybody." And they said, "We're going to have a guy with excited delirium, and you and Alex are going to engage, and Alex will tase him." And I was like, "Oh, this sounds like fun, cool." Well, we're doing this scenario. 4,000 people are watching. The band is playing. Alex and I are both standing on the other, we're trying to be tough security guards. We're wearing shirts that say security. There's 50, 60 people on the railing. and so then the lights kind of like go out, and the stage collapses, and everyone starts screaming, and then all of a sudden there's mannequins everywhere, and all these people are hurt, and then there's this guy with excited delirium, and he's acting crazy. Well, without thinking, I jump over a railing to engage him, and he starts coming at me, and I put my hands up and I back up and I hit the railing without trying. And they weren't trying. They recreated my incident almost perfectly. I hit the railing and I go, and Alex jump over the railing and tackles the guy. Like, and I didn't know what was happening. I didn't recognize, but all of a sudden my heart rate went up, my blood pressure went up, and I just had this instinct. I wanted to kill this poor kid who was an actor. And I remember just like, I mean, I was going to kill him. I was ready to murder. And Alex tackled the guy, and he kind of looks up at me, and we had this look. And I'm like, and I realized what happened. I go, oh, holy shit, I'm right back at the trolley stop. Like, what the hell? And I ran out of the room, and Alex was right behind me. And we run out of the lobby, and we're just going, what was that? Like, you know what I mean? And I broke down. I started crying. My heart rate went through the roof. My blood pressure through the roof. And I've been back to work now for a few months. October to February, 4 months, and I felt like I went right back to square one, bawling, crying. Blood pressure through the roof, like ready to murder, tasting blood in my mouth, like it started all over again.
Oh no.
And then Alex, made a joke, and he did. I think he said like, "Well, that didn't go well," right? Like something sarcastic, and it helped. I started laughing immediately through my tears. I'm laughing. Then he picked me up off the ground, and we went to a bar and got drunk. I flew home, and I went right out of work. Right, I'm back out mental health, and I'm back at Foreman's office, and I'm just like, I thought I was good. Like, what happened? And he said, well, come on, man. Like you were doing good, but to recreate the incident without you being prepared for it, he goes, that's like the worst thing you could have done.
Yeah.
And so it took me another couple months to kind of back doing EMDR and working through my feelings and then getting back to work again in probably March or April. But
In that moment, were you able to draw upon things that the Dr. Foreman had shared with you in the past, or would that stage sort of come later in the recovery?
yeah, so that came later in the recovery. I felt like that one kind of knocked me off my horse. It
Mhm.
caught me off guard so much so that I felt like I had to start all over. But I didn't have to start all over, right? Because now I have all the building blocks. I know what I have to do. And I was grateful that I learned I wasn't as healed as I thought I was. It slowed me down a bit. Went, okay, man, you need to spend more time in this therapist chair. Like you got some more work to do. Like get back to it. Um, and then I'll tell you, I got so good at mental health, and I got so good at recovering that I had another incident where I was at Target, and I was pushing uh, a cart, and I didn't know this, but the people in the front were shorthanded, and so they paged the people in the back like, "Hey, can we get more help?" Well, their page tones
Yeah.
sound exactly like our structure fire tones. And I'm walking, and the tones went off, and my heart rate jumped, and I went, and I was like, "What the hell is happening?" And I kind of doubled over, and I went, "Ooh, I'm having a reaction. Like, what? I've been triggered. Like, what is it?" And so instead of being scared or caught off guard, I was like, "Oh, this is a game, right? Like, let's play a game. What's triggering me right now? Like, what set me off?" And so I had my hands on both knees, and I was like, whoo, right, like trying to control my breathing. And I was like, what was it? What's happening? I was like looking around. I'm like, what triggered me? And I'm looking for knives. I'm looking for trolleys. I'm looking, right. And then I heard the tones again. And when I realized what it was, that's what triggered me. I started laughing. And then it all went away because I knew what it got me. And then it was fun. It was a fun game that instead of a nightmare. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that's a lesson for all of us, right? And one of the things you talk about when you speak is that we all have trauma from this job. Frank Lito, who had done
Yeah.
counseling through FTNY, I think you've
Yep.
met.
Yep, I have.
Frank, I stole this line from him. He said in one of his presentations, he said, firefighters are expecting firefighters to not be affected emotionally by what we see is like someone walking through water without getting wet. Yet we continually do a lot of the things that you recognize, right? Like we just say, "Hey, I'm fine, I'm okay. Everyone else around me is okay." Let's transfer what you've gone through, and now what do what techniques did Dr. Mark give you that you think everybody in the fire service needs to know? And what are your biggest kind of missions and movements right now going forward to help others?
Oh man, that is such a great question. He taught me so much. I convinced him to write a book with me. And so we're writing a book together, and we've been working on it for 5 years. It's so hard because we've learned so much, and I want to be able to share. God, wow, where to start with that?
Give me your top three, because I
Yeah,
think
yeah. Okay, so the number one thing, and this is so easy to say and so hard to do, it is being positive, looking at the positive in any situation, finding the positive. And everything I've read about resilience and the ability to endure horrific things, it's all the mindset. It's all how you view it. It's all how you take it in, and instead of why is this happening to me, just change the mindset to, ooh, what is this trying to teach me? And just that simple positive outlook and adjusting your outlook can make all the difference in the world. And in the fire service, I think is really hard because we see the results, right? We see the bad results. And so it's really easy to go, well, bad things always happen. And right, it's easy to be negative and to see, right? Because and Murphy's law, if something bad happened, if something can happen, it will happen. And so, right, I mean, just
that's
fire
why we're
prevention,
called. That's
right?
crap
Right.
happens.
Because
We're called.
crap happens. Right. And
Yeah.
so it is easy to go, well, it's easy to be negative. It's easy to go, well, bad things are gonna happen, shit happens, like life is hard, like and it's oh, woe is me can very quickly come from that. And so trying to adapt that positive attitude and look at everything through a positive lens, it's so easy to say and it's so hard to do. But that is something I've taken from him. Learning to journal. And I first started journaling before I even met Foreman, initially because I was afraid that by the time we went to trial, I wouldn't be able to remember anything about the call. And so I was journaling furiously. Um, but what Foreman taught me is, take a moment and at the end of each day, write down 3 things that went well, right? That you learned, or 3 lessons you learned today, whatever it is, but looking at the end of your day from a positive outlook. And that made all the difference, taking my journaling and turning it into a positive journal, daily affirmation type thing. That is a just a game changer. If I could share anything, that would be one of them.
Yeah, it's like a Jedi mind trick, right? Whenever you aren't feeling good, like we use it on kids all the time, and I always say it works on firefighters too. I don't like this, and Chief did that, and this is but you like ice cream, don't you? But ice cream tastes so good, and right, like,
Right.
and there's a lot of science to it. So be positive. Write that down. What's one more that you would say that every first responder needs to do?
Yeah, so he taught me, and I'm gonna mess this up. 5 things: gratitude, meaning, uh, forgiveness, something, and acceptance. Damn it! I knew I was gonna. I
Yeah.
always do 5, and then I name 4 of them. But gratitude, meaning, forgiveness, acceptance, and there's one more. Oh, he's gonna kill me when he sees this because he drilled it into me, and then I can't remember that 5th one. Um, but again, just looking for the meaning. The stabbing for me has meaning. I found meaning in it. It allowed me to be a mental health advocate for my department, and it allowed me to have a better relationship with my wife, and it has opened a lot of doors for me, right? And so giving it meaning and being grateful actually that it happened, because I think like it saved my relationship with my wife. Um, accepting that it happened, forgiving Stabby, right? Not carrying that anger and bitterness toward him. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want him in prison. I'm very happy he's there, and I hope he stays there a long, long time. But I forgive him. I don't want to carry that anger with me. Um, um,
Right, and you're
so
saying, yeah, this gave you purpose, and you had mentioned earlier that it gave you a get out of jail card, kind of free to get help.
yeah,
But you don't need to get stabbed, right? that's what you really are on a mission to let everybody else know, correct?
Yes, please. You don't have to get stabbed to go get help. Any calls are bothering you. Your relationship with your wife is struggling. You not happy you got passed over for promotion. Like whatever it is, whatever that anger, frustration is, the guilt of losing a kid on a call. I mean, it doesn't have to be just job related. Life has a funny way of kicking you in the teeth. There is nothing wrong with getting help, talking to a professional. I mean, that's what they're there for. And in the fire service, the number one physical injury is a back injury. And if a guy came walking into the kitchen bent over and in a lot of pain, I'd go, "Hey man, you have a back injury. That happens to a lot of our people. But now you got to go get surgery and get it fixed, right?" Well, it's the same thing in the fire service. We have a lot of mental health injuries. It happens. It's normal. Go to a professional and get it fixed, right? Don't carry it with you. Don't, and most guys are, "Oh, I got it. I got it." I'm like, sure, you can limp physically from a knee injury, but God, if you got your ACL repaired, you'd be good as new. Like the same thing with mental health, man. Just treat it, right? Get it fixed, and then I promise you, you'll actually be better, stronger, more positive. More fun to be around at the firehouse, and you'll be a better patient advocate. You'll take better care of your patients. You'll be a better husband, wife, father, son. I mean, you'll just be an overall better person. Get help.
A better advocate for just for your community,
Yeah.
and for your family. And I think that's a great summary and way to bring everything back full circle. That crap happens. Be grateful. Ask why. What's the meaning? And then pay it forward, which is what you're doing with this. I'd like to say this horrible incident, but it brought us together and brought you to tell the story. And we're hoping that a lot of people will reach out to you and to us and say thank you, and maybe go get help. Go find a counselor. We've recommended numerous times. We've had a lot of leaders on this program say counseling is the bomb. As I think one of our guests said, counseling's cool. I believe every first responder needs to do it every year, even if you feel like you're doing well. Like
Yeah.
you said, we're clueless about how we treat everyone else around us. So I can't thank you enough for all your honesty and your passion and emotion and sharing all this with us. But I got to tell you, you're not done yet. It's probably the hardest part of the entire podcast is when Janelle puts you on the hot seat and asks you some more personal questions that come from probably our greatest fan, right? Mom has one or two in there, right, Janelle?
Always, of course.
All right, bring it. What do you got?
All right, Ben. So you have a really amazing ability to bring humor to this very dark situation. Um, First of all, have you always had this sense of humor? Did you like really tap into it after this incident as like a coping mechanism?
I'd like to think I had it beforehand. My family is very funny, very dark and twisted. And I'll give you the example. My little sister, I'm in high school, she's in junior high, and we go to like a Target or whatever, and we're shopping, and she's in front of me. Um, and right as she pays for her stuff, I was accompanying her, and right as she walks away, she goes, "Hey brother, are you going to pay for that thing you put in your pocket?" And then she just walked away. And I didn't have anything in my pocket. She knew that, but she said that in front of the store clerk and a security guard. And I went, and she walked away. And then the security guard stepped in and goes, "Son, let me see everything in your pocket." And I was like, "Oh." And so she, what I mean? Like, what a sense of humor that girl had.
That's twisted.
Oh, it's so twisted, but that's the family I come from, man. We
Well,
pranks on each other and stuff. So.
I've seen you speak a couple times about this incident, and you've got a name and like a whole ecosystem in which Stabby lives. Like,
Well, his full name is Stabby Stabberton, and he is the mayor of Stabberville, and that's that's the ecosystem. He lives in Stabberville. He's the mayor. But yeah, I always like. I don't want to call him by his name because I don't want to give him credit, but I think Stabby's a good nickname.
I like Stabby. And speaking of family and craziness, so we all know, firefighters, we we're a little demented. So what's the biggest prank that your crew has played on you about this incident now that you're back?
Well, I mean, so I had
That
earned
you
a
could
nick-
tell us at least.
Yeah, no. So I earned a nickname, Olaf. Did I tell this story in the first episode? I don't think I did.
No.
So I earned a nickname, Olaf. I was at Fours with my crew, and Fours is one of the busiest in the city, and we run dozens of calls after midnight. It's painful. And so we had this call, and this elderly woman was homeless, and she called us at like 3 a.m. And I get out of the rig, and I'm going, ma'am, how can I help you? And she said, I'm sorry to bother you. There's nothing physically wrong with me. I'm just really lonely. Can I have a hug? And I said, ma'am, you don't want to go to the hospital? And she said, no. And I said, so I give you a hug, and then that's it. I can go back to bed. And she goes, yeah. And I go, oh, bring it in, girl. And I gave her a big old hug. I ended up with bed bugs and lice. And so my crew nicknamed Olaf, the little snowman from Frozen that gives warm hugs. Well, then when I came back to work, there were Olaf dolls with knives in them. And there were pictures of Olaf being, stabbed a bunch of times. So that was the kind of stuff they would leave for me around my station when I came back to work, which I thought was pretty funny.
More twisted.
More twisted, yeah. More twisted.
So you've talked about journaling and a few different things. What is currently your go-to method for when you need to decompress, get away, if you're feeling triggered? Do you have something you use right now that's your primary?
No, I have a lot. So I really focus on this a lot. I have a long commute to work. I drive over an hour to work. And so I stopped listening to music, and now I listen to podcasts like yours. I listen to audiobooks on leadership, on mental health. That hour now of commuting is one of my favorite hours in the day because it's my time to just listen to people like yourselves, right? Doing talks, and I love it. And so that I use to get my mind right, going to work and coming home from work. And my goal is to be completely decompressed by the time I pull into my driveway so that I'm 100% available for my wife. I try to leave. I got that hour, and I purposely do things in that car to decompress. And I like that. Physical fitness, Zam, I know you're a big fan. Everything I've read, right? It is key to mental health is to be physically fit. When COVID hit, everyone's like, we're going to work out twice a day. And I said, I'm going to learn how to bake. And I did. I got so good at it, but I have gained so much weight. So I'm trying to swim more. That swimming, no music, no podcasts, just me and my little world in my lane. And I purposely, when I get in the pool, go, okay, this is my physical fitness. And where's my brain going to go today? And I just swim, and I just let my brain go loose. I've learned to embrace yoga. I'm the least flexible person on the planet, but my wife loves it. And she is cruel because she will hold a pose and have a conversation with me. And my arms are shaking, and I'm sweating, and I'm like, change the pose, and she's like, no, let's talk more. And I'm like, oh, and I like fall on my face. But I like doing yoga with her because she's very good at it. And it is, again, stretching feels really good. Journaling, I do a lot, and I'm working on a book that has taken up a lot of my time. So I took a class on positive psychology from a woman named Karen Deppa. She's in Pennsylvania. You should interview her. She's awesome. But she put on a class on positive psychology, and so I took that. And she purposely designed it for firefighters. And so I took her class. God, what else? I do. If someone tells me equine therapy is a thing, I will go do it just to see what it's about. And so I like that too. If you have anything that I haven't tried yet, let me know, and I will go do it because I want to learn about it and see if it's something for me. So,
all right, I got one more for you.
Go ahead.
When you and I are speaking at some conferences together coming up, what is your walk-up song for when they have you present?
Like a relief pitcher in the majors?
Yep.
Oh man, there's got to be something with knives, right? There has to be a knife song. Come on, help me out.
Or something with Olaf.
Sharp dressed man.
Ooh, wow. Janelle gets a gets in it. I love that's great. Yeah.
Yes, I like it. That'll be my song. I need a walk-up song. That'll be it.
Again, for everybody that's listening, hopefully you're inspired. I know I have been, and ever since I got an opportunity, we got an opportunity here to have you on and speak to you. What do you want people to take from these last couple podcasts and your story?
It's okay to ask for help. I strongly recommend you go to therapy, even if you don't feel you need it. For the love of God, talk to your spouse and really be vulnerable and check in with them, because it is amazing what our spouses go through while we are gone at work. And I was blissfully unaware. So yeah, just take care of yourselves, take care of your partners, take care of each other. And if you need help, get it. That's all I got.
Well, very well said, Ben. I can't thank you enough. I know that other members of the fire service are going to get a lot of value from this, and I can't wait to see you, meet you, continually hear about your journey. Read the book when it comes out. For those that are listening to this podcast, if you haven't heard the first episode, please go right away and listen to that. You can actually watch these episodes on the Fire Rescue One YouTube page. You can see them also on firerescue1.com under the Better Every Shift podcast. We'd love to have you email us with your thoughts and feedback. Let us know if we're on something or onto something. If you have questions for us, you can reach us at bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. Please rate, review the show. But most importantly, everybody, please take to heart the lessons that Ben has learned and lived through. And that's make sure to be kind to each other, help each other, make sure that you understand that you need to take care of yourself, your crew, your family. And you also need to learn something, do something, and share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.